There's more reaction today to Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejecting a two-state solution. It's a position he's long held, but the open defiance of his strongest ally could cause new problems.
That is a truth that I'm saying to our friends, the Americans, and I've also blocked an attempt to force upon us a reality which will hurt the security of Israel. A prime minister in Israel must be able to say no, even to the closest of our friends.
Netanyahu says he told the U.S. he will not support the establishment of a Palestinian state once the war against Hamas is over. The White House says U.S. President Joe Biden spoke by phone today with Netanyahu, and here is his spokesperson, John Kirby.
The president still believes in the promise and the possibility of a two-state solution. He recognizes that's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot of leadership there in the region, particularly on both sides of the issue. And the United States stands firmly committed to eventually seeing that outcome. We'll always work with them, regardless of the differences, maybe on political issues. They chose this government. This is the government that is in charge of conducting warfare against Hamas. We're going to make sure that they have what they need, in addition to making sure, as I said in the opening statement, that we're doing everything we can to alleviate the humanitarian suffering in Gaza.
Reaction also today from Qatar. Our CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, spoke to the advisor to Qatar's prime minister. That country often acts as mediator between Israel and Hamas. They're calling Netanyahu's statement unacceptable.
These statements are nothing if obstructive to the effort of mediation, but it also provides fuel to the fire when it comes to the narrative around peace in the region. If we are talking about a chance for peace, we're talking about a chance for peace for both Palestinians and the Israeli.
That full interview with Dr. Alan Sari will be on Rosemary Barton Live this Sunday, starting at 10 Eastern on CBC News Network and CBC Gem, and 11 a.m. Eastern on CBC Television. Okay, against that geopolitical backdrop, there is renewed domestic pressure on the Liberal government to reject allegations of genocide against Israel, and it's coming from inside the Liberal caucus. Former Cabinet Minister Marco Mendicino and Liberal MP Anthony Housefather have published an op-ed calling for Canada to join other G7 allies in opposing the case South Africa has brought to the International Court of Justice. And Liberal MP Anthony Housefather joins me now. Mr. Housefather, it's good to speak with you. Thank you for taking the time.
Good to speak with you too, David.
Your government, it has decided that Canada will remain neutral on the merits of this case. Why is that unacceptable to you?
Because the charge of genocide is one of the most serious things you could ever allege that a country is doing. And to claim that Israel, after being attacked by a terrorist organization whose mission is genocidal in its own charter, to destroy the state of Israel and to eradicate Jewish people across the world, as they've called for on many occasions, to claim that Israel, in defending itself, is committing genocide is a horrific charge that is insulting not only to the state of Israel, but to all Canadians who support Israel, including in particular the vast majority of members of the Jewish community in Canada. And I think we can unequivocally, like our G7 allies, like the United States, like the UK, like Italy, like Germany, like France, we should completely reject this charge. It is not okay to be neutral on this. We need to make clear to the world that while we can easily criticize Israel's military actions, we could say that we think that they're not being careful enough in protecting civilians, to claim that they're trying to eradicate the Palestinians, to commit genocide, when the Genocide Convention was written in the shadows of the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were killed, and nobody, more than Israel understands that history, it's horrifying. And I think Canada needs to take a moral stand, clearly rejecting the claim.
So, as you know, there was some confusion and misunderstanding and clarification in the week since Canada stated its position on this. We have been trying to get a cabinet minister, a parliamentary secretary, an ambassador to come on and explain things on behalf of the Canadian government with no success. Have you spoken to the Prime Minister, Minister Mélanie Joly, or other senior officials to get an explanation as to why they chose this path?
So obviously those discussions would be confidential, but yes, of course, I've spoken at length to Minister Joly. I've spoken to officials in the Prime Minister's office, and I've made my point clearly, and I think convincingly, at least to me, that we need to take a proper stand. I think originally the Prime Minister's comments were seen, including by me, as being a rejection of South Africa's claims, but later comments, later statements that have come from a variety of officials seem to indicate that we're not being clear and unequivocal, and I think we need to be.
What if they don't reverse course? It seems like they're fairly set on trying to thread this needle. What do you do if there isn't a shift in position?
There's no needle to thread. I mean, here there's no needle to thread, right? You either say unequivocally Israel is not committing genocide and side with our ally Israel at a time when Israel's at war, which has been Canada's history. Canada's history has been under the Martin government, under the Harper government, and under the Trudeau government, that we felt that Israel was being unfairly vilified and singled out at international organizations. And we chose to vote against UN resolutions repeatedly that most of the world voted for because of the unfair singling out of Israel. This claim against Israel is outrageous, and we need to take a clear position. And that is my view, and I will keep repeating that view. That we, in this case, the charge of genocide, an odious charge, a blood libel against Israel, I can only say that we have to speak out against it.
How do you think, Mr. Housefather, and I appreciate your point, you're a Jewish MP, you've been speaking up on behalf of your community, you're a strong defender of Israel. There is this anger and protest and frustration in the streets of Canada's biggest cities right now. If the Canadian government had taken a side either way, what do you think it would have done to that dynamic? Had they sided with South Africa, what would that have done to Jews? Had they sided with Israel, what would that have done to Palestinians and Arabs in Canada in terms of how they'd be feeling right now in the country?
Well, I don't think that's the question. I think you do what's right. I think right now you have a charge of genocide. You can criticize Israel without making the outrageous claim that Israel is committing genocide. And so, to me, you can look at the streets in the United States where the government has rejected the claim. You could look at the streets of Germany where the government has rejected the claim. You could look at the streets of the UK where the government has rejected the claim, the streets of France where the government has rejected the claim, the streets of Italy where the government has rejected the claim, the streets of Austria where the government has rejected the claim. Why would something different happen in Canada than is happening right now?
So what do you do, just to go back to my earlier question, what do you do if they don't change course, and how is this affecting things internally for your caucus? Because we know there's a lot of disagreement inside your caucus that you've been able to be civil on to this point. What do you do, and how does this affect things?
Well, for the moment, all I do is I do my best to advocate for the views that I hold, which is very important to me. This issue is incredibly important to me as a Jewish Canadian. And it would be wrong for me to hide my views and wrong for me not to fiercely advocate for my views with everyone that I speak to that has the ability to, change course and be a bit clearer on this issue. And I think we need to be clear. I think the Canadian population needs to know that this government does not believe that Israel is committing genocide. And that was the purpose of the op-ed. I tried to set out the arguments with my colleague and friend, Marco Mendicino, and the two of us will continue to work on this issue.
Are there more people in caucus who back you on this? Do you know yet? I know you're going to have your caucus retreat next week here in Ottawa. I imagine this will be a big topic of conversation. Do you have a sense of how widespread your support on this is?
I mean, I think it would be wrong for me to start going into what people's positions are when they haven't publicly expressed them. I certainly don't feel that our position is unique to Marco and I.
Okay, I appreciate that, sir. Okay, so I want to touch on something you said in your earlier answers. You emphatically and clearly reject the allegations of genocide, but you mentioned that you can criticize how Israel is conducting the war. We have seen the U.S. repeatedly call for extra steps to protect civilians. We have seen the UK Foreign Minister David Cameron say publicly he fears Israel may have broken international law in some of its actions. How do you view what's happened in the way Israel and the IDF has conducted things in this conflict?
I would echo what the United States has said, that we would call on Israel to exercise every caution. I believe the IDF's intention, I believe Israel's intention is to go after military targets. We have to remember that Hamas uses civilians as human shields, but there have been a lot of people killed, and they have to be as prudent as they possibly can be given the circumstances. And certainly I would call on Israel to keep using every possible restraint and try their best to allow as much humanitarian aid into Gaza as possible.
In terms of next steps, we opened the show with a discussion of what Prime Minister Netanyahu said this week, rejecting the idea of any kind of a Palestinian state in a post-war scenario. I know Canada's official position is to support a two-state solution. I believe you also personally support the idea of a two-state solution. What's your reaction to the position the government of Israel is laying out at this point in the conflict and what it means for this conflict?
Well, right now there is a wartime coalition, so I don't know that the position advanced by Prime Minister Netanyahu is coherently the government's position, because you have people like Mr. Gantz in the government that I don't know would have agreed with Mr. Netanyahu. I think the statement yesterday was very much unhelpful. It was not helpful to Israel internationally. It was not helpful to people like me who are vociferous advocates for Israel. I believe the only way that Israel can last as a Jewish and democratic state is a two-state solution where two peoples live in peace side by side. I understand why right now that seems like a faraway goal. I think that the attack by Hamas on October the 7th definitely challenged Israelis' perceptions of the situation. But I do believe that we need strong leadership on both sides that will take that step. And I think the Abraham Accords, where Israel has been making peace one by one with different Arab states, is the way that we have to continue to proceed. And the peace with Saudi Arabia would be a very important step in that regard.
Anthony Housefather, we always appreciate your willingness to come on and speak so candidly on tough stuff. Thank you. That's Liberal MP Anthony Housefather.
Thanks, David.